The color we're going to investigate today is barely a color. We're talking about one of the most popular warm whites out there, and it has a name that some of you might recognize if you watch this channel a lot. Shoutouts to all my subscribers. We're about to crack the code on color number 12. Yeah, it's just called 12. We got the code, now let's do some cracking. Yeesh. The color we're going to investigate today is barely a color. I got that later on. Love bear puns. It's a warm off-white with an LRV of around 84, and its name is Swiss Coffee. If you're not sure what LRV stands for, quick explanation for the non-subscribers watching. Tisk, tisk, tisk. It stands for light reflectance value, and it's just a percentage from 0 to 100, explaining the amount of usable light the color reflects, which also gives you kind of an idea of how light or dark a color is numerically. 84 is pretty light in the grand scheme of things. In fact, most paint colors that are above 80 can normally be deemed as off-white or even white paint colors, where it's light enough that its undertones can become harder to distinguish. There are some colors out there around 70 LRV which try and call themselves off-white, but they're not. They're just light colors. Stop trying to be off-white. You're just light, okay? And I hope I don't need to remind you all the importance of testing your colors out, so don't just blindly pick a color online and buy a ton of gallons of it. Test them out, get a mighty board, see it in the space that you're using it in. Super important. So what's Swiss Coffee by Behr all about? And yeah, we're talking about Behr's Swiss Coffee, not Benjamin Moore's. If you wanted to hear about that, I'll leave that in the cards up top here, I think. Yeah, there. Really, the colors do have a lot of similarities in the fact that they're both warm and soft off-whites that will seem clean, cozy, but not quite stark in pretty much any situation. Its warmth is a touch more beige rather than yellow leaning, which is nice because it's going to feel less volatile as a color. You might find that yellow-based whites can sometimes have a tad of a green, unexpected undertone that comes in, especially if you have a lot of LED or fluorescent lighting throughout your home. Swiss Coffee is going to feel a little more resistant to that because it's pretty soft in its composition, making it a great color to use amongst all kinds of different colors. If you are looking for some colors to pair with Swiss Coffee, I have a light, a medium, and a dark color that are all quite different from one another. So the light color I want to suggest is less of a paired color and more of a Swiss Coffee alternative. It's called Nano White, and this color is quite bright. Its LRV is 87, so that's 3 points higher than Swiss Coffee, but it also contains quite a bit less of that visible warmth. Really, I think they do very similar things, but Nano White is perhaps a more comfortable alternative in those color palettes that incorporate a larger amount of cooler tones in general. So if you're gravitating towards grays, greens, and blues, it may be a more straightforward option for you to just go with Nano White, but if you love yourself some warmth, Swiss Coffee is still mucho beautifulio. For the mid-tone color, I'm going with the 51 LRV color called Chopped Dill, which is a pretty saturated sage green that has a touch more yellow than you might expect. It seems to have an appropriate level of warmth to coincide with Swiss Coffee really well. And its chroma is going to be a lot higher than your safer, more neutral gray-leaning greens. Hey James, what's chroma? Chroma is basically the color intensity. So as you have higher chroma, you get more of a bright, saturated, pure color. And when you go lower, it gets more neutral and gray-leaning and desaturated. For my dark color choice, I kind of decided against picking an off black this time, or even a taupe. I opted for Rusty Gate. It only has a 19 LRV, which isn't super dark, but that doesn't make it feel any less saturated. It's a very rich terracotta color that is extremely different than the green we just spoke about, and that's kind of why I picked it. But it's nearly as relevant in the color palettes we're starting to see today. I see this color working alongside Swiss Coffee really well, just because they're both warm, but neither relies heavily on a yellow warmth. There's something inviting and a little bit nostalgic about terracotta that I'm truly fond of, because I used it heavily 10, maybe even 15 years ago, and I kind of miss it. I will tread softly though when using Chopped Dill and Rusty Gate in the same space, because they are fairly complementary. And whenever you have those complementary color pairings, it can be pretty vibrant and dynamic. And you might even give a bit of a Christmas vibe when using them in tandem with that green and red sort of theme. So if you want a look that is cohesive but not too dynamic, consider using one over the other or have them in completely separate rooms or spaces. You could also incorporate one as an accessory color and then have the other as your primary color, or have them both play second fiddle to Swiss Coffee as your main color. There's truly a number of ways you can incorporate them all, but just looking out my window, I can see this old shoe factory that uses this kind of terracotta color here with Swiss Coffee lined accents around everything, and then you have green trees in front of them. So I'd be lying if I said that this didn't inspire this color combination, but it looks pretty good. So back to Swiss Coffee. When we're looking at a white trim color here, I would recommend going with something brighter than Swiss Coffee if you wanted to see some contrast. Now this is hard to do though because Swiss Coffee itself is already quite light and is a wonderful off-white trim color choice on its own. So that could be your answer right there. If you're using Swiss Coffee on your walls, maybe just continue it onto your trim, or put another color on the walls and have Swiss Coffee as your trim color. But if you did want to use it on your walls, a color like Crystal Cut will be a very subtle difference, but will have just enough of an increase in brightness to separate itself a little bit. It certainly won't provide the same contrast you might be used to with your white trim, but the option is there for you. We got Benjamin Moore's version of Swiss Coffee ready for your viewing pleasure if you want to check that out, so stay tuned.